Sexism is defined as a prejudice based on someone's gender. The application of sexism has evolved throughout history as women have become more integral to society. Particularly in the 1960s and 70s, men were put on a pedestal which oppressed women and depicted them as weak and incapable. Even at Newsweek, one of the most prestigious and progressive media outlets in America, women suffered sexism. These highly educated and driven individuals precariously joined forces to launch a rebellion fighting the unfair treatment of women at their company. These women strove for more than simple-minded jobs in the mailroom or acting as an intern and going uncredited for their work. They wanted and deserved recognition at Newsweek. Fueled by a disrespectful and thankless work environment, the female workers at Newsweek filed a lawsuit against their employer, catalyzing changes in the traditional work environment but not managing to completely eradicate workplace sexism. Simply because of their gender, the women at Newsweek were wrongfully unappreciated, censored, and lived in the men's shadows. In their Newsweek job interviews, women were told that they would never get to the top. According to the bosses, who were always men, the women's high-pitched voices did not sound authoritative enough, and their looks were too distracting. The men purposefully neglected to look at female applicants' educational backgrounds, mostly consisting of fine universities and previous journalism experience. Even though women enjoyed their jobs at Newsweek, this treatment became an expectation. Out of the 50 bylines at Newsweek, only one was a woman. This men-only policy was defended by Osborne Elliott, the magazine's editor. He asserted that it was a long-standing tradition. At best, women would become researchers, a lofty goal even when they were pinned against incompetent men. In this position, women were forced to hand in their work to their male colleagues, who would then reap the benefits and leave them in the dust. There was a silent agreement at Newsweek considering everyone around the women as superior. This hierarchy was exemplified by the unintentionally insulting labels given by men. Referred to as dollies, the female workers were characterized by fragility and vulnerability, the living dolls of the men they worked with. Small sexist subtleties such as this were common at Newsweek. When hiring new females, men were told to check their waist size first. Men would often comment on the female's perfectly pointed breasts as the women turned in their work. They would also often use sexualized and vulgar words in their workplace vernacular that would target their female colleagues. This striking reality of sexism was also visible in their office setup. The desks in offices were organized so that the women's desks were confined in the center under the men's supervision. In the men's eyes, the women were lucky to be where they were, and were self-described as polite perfectionists who were too timid to show their drive around men. Outside of the Newsweek doors, the women's movement was well underway. Many men viewed the movement that promoted feminism as an insignificant joke. They scoffed at the diverse collection of women involved in it, many of whom drastically changed their appearances by no longer wearing makeup or shaving their legs. With the new wave of feminism, the Newsweek women started to recognize the injustices that circumscribed their work experience. The dollies grew restless. Empowered by all the women protesting in the streets, the Newsweek women decided to take action in their own workplace and began secretly meeting in the bathrooms to discuss their grievances. They understood that the change they demanded would not happen overnight. They were terrified of what lay ahead, but positive that something had to be done. The women's patience gave out when Newsweek published a cover story titled "Women in Revolt." Unknowingly, the magazine publication was telling the story of its own employees in the article. In addition to the sensitive subject, the women were enraged because Newsweek did not even look among its own female employees to write the article. Instead, it was written by the wife of a New York Post editor. The day the issue was released onto the newsstands, the women decided to hold a press conference to announce their lawsuit for gender discrimination against Newsweek. Even at this press conference, where the women intended to assert themselves and their actions, other newspapers described them based on appearance, calling them slim, mini-skirted, and pretty. In response to their unacceptable work climate, female researchers filed a lawsuit for sex discrimination against Newsweek. The number of women fighting Newsweek grew from 3 to 46. Lucy Howard, Lynn Povich, and Judy Gingold, the original ringleaders of the movement, recruited women one by one. Ultimately, they were the first group of women to sue their employers due to gender discrimination based on Title VII, which prohibits employers from discriminating against employees on the basis of sex, race, ethnicity, or religion. After the press conference, the women sought legal guidance. They were reassured that they had a case, but were continuously rejected by civil rights lawyers. Eventually, they found the perfect lawyer for their case, Eleanor Holmes Norton. She knew that it was a groundbreaking case that would have ripple effects on all of society, and admired that it expanded the common scope of civil rights. Norton said in a public statement how ironic it was that Newsweek considers women's grievances newsworthy enough for a cover page story, but continues to maintain a policy of discrimination against women on its own staff. Norton urged the women to stop being so polite about their abuses, or their lawsuit would fail. She invoked passion and motivation. Fittingly, she later became a Washington, D.C. congresswoman. The women officially filed a complaint with the Equal Opportunity Commission, stating that they were systematically discriminated against in both hiring and promotion and forced to assume a subsidiary role. With the help of Norton, the women were a powerful force. They evoked different reactions from the men at Newsweek. Osborne Elliott professed his hurt and betrayed feelings to the women with hopes to change their minds. Other men reacted with shocked silence. This battle of courage against men was unexpected by Newsweek. The women's male counterparts were baffled by how they could co-work with these women every day, unaware of their disgust. Osborne Elliott told Lynn Povich, junior writer, that he and his male employees were distracted by more worldly and secular problems outside of the office. The suit was such a hotly considered topic that many popular news sources covered it. The New York Times summarized the final decisions of the eventual settlement. The National Observer called the lawsuit unprecedented action. The Washington Post described Newsweek as under attack by the women. The London Daily Express claimed that the lawsuit was inflating already haunting feminism in America. Not all women were looking for change in the workplace. They were afraid of the disruption and possible backlash it would incite. Some Newsweek women believed it was out of place and inappropriate for a woman to step on a man's toes and told the revolutionary women that they were behaving like naive little girls. Other women simply wanted to report their grievances to the publisher. Lucy Howard, a leader of the suit, arrived at home the night of the suit, sobbing in the bathtub and thinking her eyes were going to be all puffy tomorrow. She was feeling she has to do this, but she can't. Women like Howard did not want to abolish and overturn the existing system. They just wanted to alter it to help their advancement in the workplace. Lynn Povich, a junior writer, joined the uprising, even though she never noticed it personally in her position. She worked under Harry Waters, who Povich considered a good boss. However, when Povich discovered it was illegal to deprive women of promotions, an act Newsweek was consistently guilty of, she knew she had to take a stand. The women's tireless efforts and drained emotions paid off. Newsweek and the Dollies reached a settlement. The case against Newsweek had created a voice for women across the work environment. Lynn Povich first noticed receiving appreciation from men and women alike when she was promoted to a writer in her department. 3 months later, women started organizing themselves at other news publications, including NBC. Inspired by Newsweek women, Shirley Christian, a journalist for the Associated Press, filed her own lawsuit against her employer. In 1970, women journalists in their 20s were making $5,000 less than their male counterparts. As of 2005, the number rose dramatically, and women were reported to make $5,000 more than men in the same career. Today, the majority of jobs in America are filled by women, such as nursing, teaching, and accounting. However, women have just scratched the surface in the battle against gender discrimination. Today, women are still paid only about 70 to 80% of the amount that a man is paid in the same position. The current news director of Newsweek, Christina Silva, has managed to raise the placement of women in the masthead from 0 to 1. In 1970, 25% of Newsweek's editorial staff was female, and today it is 39%. These numbers have risen, but are nowhere near satisfactory. Like successful feminist and journalist Jessica Bennett said, just a few females at the top of the food chain does not eradicate sexism. Even Lynn Povich was told by the executive editor, Bob Christopher, that her promotion was the worst mistake the management had ever made. Povich was proud of the raise she received from $27,000 to $32,000 until discovering that Charlie Michener had also been promoted and was now making $40,000. There was always a man that was superior. In this highly sexualized environment, it is extremely difficult to navigate roles in the workplace. The women of Newsweek in 1970 allowed the feminist fight to reach the world so that women everywhere knew that they were not alone. The Newsweek lawsuit only precipitated a temporary compromise, but not a long-term solution. Most importantly, the women vocalized their complaints and in return got a form of recognition. This was the first of its kind in the workforce. The Newsweek women pioneered a much longer battle against institutionalized sexism. The gender war was and is still being waged. Sexism in journalism, even in Newsweek, is not fully eradicated. However, improvements are gradually taking place and the imbalance in the working place is now acknowledged and vulnerable. Although the lawsuit did not result in a fully satisfactory compromise, it became the platform for future gender discrimination disputes and their subsequent compromises.
I am woman, hear me roll, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend.